Hi, my name is CJ and this is my RC channel. In this video, I'm going to unbox and start a rebuild on the 104001, the much awaited match, a true breakthrough sort of for WLToys, a 1/10 scale all-wheel drive buggy. This potentially could be made roar legal to race. I don't know where you are in the world, so that may not apply to you. You may be able to race it anyway. If you're backyard racing or you're racing with a casual club, they may allow this as is. The biggest roadblock is the battery. Roar does not allow soft packs. You have to have a hard pack. Now, I have extensive CAD experience in a 3D printer, so I'm going to see if I can create some battery mounts that will allow a shorty pack to fit in here if there's enough room. Be finding that out very shortly here in the unboxing. I expect that the differentials will be just like the other WLToys. Little or no grease, and if there is anything in there, it's going to be this pasty, waxy stuff. It'll be interesting to see if they have a better diff in here than their previous kits. Will it have better seals? Will it have a gasket? Will it have O-rings? Those would allow it to be able to have regular silicone differential fluid and would allow for a lot more tuning. So we'll see. It's going to be an interesting open it up and see what happens. At a price point of under $150, you really can't go wrong. If you're just getting into the hobby and you want to race, this may not be the kit for you. You may want to save some money. To make it competitive in 110, it's going to need a brushless censored motor and ESC. It's going to need a proper high-speed servo and, of course, a hard battery pack. So we'll see how far I go with this. A lot of people bash, a lot of people go speed runs. It's really not my thing. My focus is on racing. And so that's the lens that I'll be viewing this car through. Can I make it legal? Can I run it? So here we go. Drum roll, please. I sure waited a long time for this. I did a pre-order on this kit, back in January. And I really waited and waited and waited. And then I saw other people coming out with their videos. And I was like, hey, wait a second, where's mine? I ordered it in plenty of time. But I guess the mail was just a little slower. I got in on that first run, which was nice. I'm sure some people have relationships with the manufacturer and they get theirs early, and that's, you know, hey, great for them. Hopefully one day my channel will be big enough that some manufacturers will take notice and send me kits ahead of time. I would love that. So let's just have a quick look while we're here. Basic safety stuff, basic radio stuff, basic how to drive stuff. Aha! Some exploded diagrams. We've got double O-rings in our shocks. That's huge. That's a really big improvement, guys. And it is interesting that they chose a set of tires that is more of an indoor carpet tire. I don't know what the thought process was there, but you know, can work with that, and can always get more tires, wheels and tires, since it's 12mm hex. Okay, looking at our differentials, we've got O-rings, O-ring, gasket. Excellent. So this is a real diff. I don't know if they watched my videos, but somewhere along the way they got the message. We do not have a center diff. We have a slipper. Excuse me, we don't have a center diff or a slipper clutch. We've just got a straight up gear. That's not horrible. You know, we do have front and rear diffs. It would be nice to be able to balance the amount of power that goes to the front or rear, either with a slipper or with a center diff, but Someone's at the front door. So the first thing I'm going to do is take this down a bit, take apart those diffs, and fill them up with some decent fluid. So I've got a nice basic setup going. One thing I noticed when I was running a couple of the WLToys cars the other day, out on a little dirt BMX bump track nearby, that it really wanted to spin out. And one of the two, I had rebuilt the diffs on it, and I was really surprised at the just general lack of control. And I think a lot of that is the tires on those. You know, for all the people who want to put crazy fast motors in these vehicles, when the brush motor is powerful enough, when you turn the throttle up on the radio all the way so you get the max power out of that motor, and the 2-cell battery, when it's already powerful enough to spin those wheels all over the place in the dirt and make the car almost uncontrollable, and absolutely uncontrollable at times, is it really worth putting in a bigger motor if it doesn't really warrant it? I mean, if you're just going for speed runs on asphalt, you know, great, knock yourself out. But if you want to drive this in the dirt and have fun with it, try to improve your driving skills with it, when the vehicle is impossible to control, even when you're modulating the throttle, you know, you definitely need to put tires on it, and you also need to rethink doing any power upgrades. So, another one of those cheapo chargers, which I never use, because I always use a decent charger. We've got some little connectors. These looks like they would be for a, these actually look like connectors for front and rear sway bars to attach to the A-arms, but I'm not sure this kit comes with sway bars. I remember seeing photographs and noting that the Differential had the locations to put on a kit. And there's probably a lot of off-the-shelf sway bar kits for similar classed vehicles that would fit this. So that's an option. Okay, I've kept you waiting long enough. Let's get in the box. Another little Phillips head. The same radio. This car, I am definitely ripping out the ESC and receiver fairly quickly and putting in a something better so that I can use my own radio. I'm starting to get a collection of these, and I don't want to go to the field with 5 radios. Hey, we've got a pair of steering knuckles. I wonder if these are just a straight up spare or if there's a different geometry here. That'll be interesting to find out. And this is definitely 10 scale. Let me just do a little wheel-to-wheel comparison here. Hang on a moment. Just checking under the cardboard there. Nothing else except a couple of bags of those chiclets. So here is my 10 scale buggy, 2-wheel drive, and there's our all-wheel drive. So there we are, 10 scale, perfect. Definitely going to be putting some Velcro on here for this body. Nice paint job. That's a, you know, nice, easily visible, vibrant paint job. Like it. Battery. Interesting that the receiver's not stuck down. This is actually very similar in ways to the associated kit. These chassis braces here are almost identical. I'm going to compare this piece to piece when I start doing the build, because it might be possible to actually replace these heavy metal ones with the carbon fiber and or aluminum, either stock or aftermarket parts for that kit. I would like to get rid of these steel brackets in exchange for carbon fiber or fiberglass. That's something I've considered the idea of possibly drawing these up in CAD and seeing if I can't get someone to run a set or two off for me. Looks like we've got almost a standard size servo here. That might be replaceable. That's a nice solid steering rack here, even though it is plastic, and it does have bearings. Looks like there's bearings under here at these two connections as well. It'll be interesting to see how hard it is to get these screws out. That may be one of the things I do early on as well, is cook those off and replace as many of these screws with hex heads as possible. Oh yeah, let's look at droop screws. Are there any? No, there are no droop screws. But, you know, that's not a deal breaker. We can control our height by the stroke of the shock absorbers. We can use spacers if we need to lower the ride height, and springs. Gotta have to measure those and see if I've got some for it. Probably do. I'll want to rebuild those as well. I really like that they have double seals. That really puts these shocks on par with almost any other decent shock. You know, they may not have the trinitride coating on the shock shafts, and the pistons may not be machined, but if they're the right size, they can be swapped. So we'll see. Now let's talk battery for just a second. Okay, this is pretty much a standard shorty pack. Oh, heck yeah. So, and I wouldn't even need to cut the side rail here. I can make some mounts that will go right here in place of the stock ones and park a shorty pack right there. It's not gonna bump into this center brace. It'll fit right in between the center brace and the body with a millimeter or two on either side. I can use the existing mount holes. I just need to make some measurements with the trusty calipers and sit down with CAD. I will probably start that this evening. That is awesome, because this makes a huge difference in this kit. Being able to fit a proper battery means I can put a brushless motor in here, I can get a proper ESC, I can get a proper servo. Don't have to get the high-end stuff, but, you know, get some decent gear, and I can run shorty packs, and that means this car is roar legal. It's going to be heavier than the other cars, but that's something that can be worked over time. And, you know, sometimes a little extra weight can work in your favor. It may make the car a little slower, but it'll also make it more docile. We got adjustable turnbuckles all around. We've got constant velocity joints up in front with dog bone ends there. And we've got dog bones at the rear, both sides. But again, I might be able to source axles that will fit. Looks like we've got a decent amount of adjustability. Looks like we can also move our shock tower. It looks like we could mount the shock tower on the rear or the front of this diff case here. And that means we could move the shocks on the back side and use these connectors. So depending on, you know, what we get out of that, that would work. What I'm going to do is start by disassembling the diffs. I'm going to clean them out, They probably don't have much lube in them. They probably have almost no lube on the primary gears. And I am going to rebuild them with 20,000 front and 12,500 weight fluid in the rear, respectively. I'm also going to rebuild the shocks. I'm going to be rebuilding them with a set of TLR blue springs in the front and a set of TLR pink springs in the rear with 37.5 weight and 32.5 weight rear. Now you may ask, well, where do I get these numbers for this? And there's a certain amount of eyeballing involved, but one of the things I did was I pulled the setup sheets for a very similar vehicle, which is the associated RC10 B74.1, which is a very similar layout. Steering is very similar. It is a 1/10 scale, all-wheel drive buggy. So there is a logic to there being a certain commonality. This is going to be heavier, so I went up a little bit in spring rates. I looked at several different builds because, of course, there's variance across builds. I started by, finding off-road builds versus carpet, and then, went for the types of tracks or, the size of tracks and, clay versus dirt, loose versus, traction level, etc. Something similar to where I'm going to end up running this. And of course, I looked at the numbers across them, just kind of see what the variance is. And then I made my choices. Now, the springs, that's an associated car, so the team drivers that put together those setup sheets were running associated springs. So I downloaded a couple images. I just did a Google search for spring sheets, 1/10 scale, and I found the two springs by part number and color that I had chosen, and their respective weights, 4.3 and 2.2. And then, since I have TLR springs, I went to my TLR sheet, and that's why I went with sky blue in the front and pink in the rear at 4.23 and 2.3 in the rear. So that's where I got those numbers. Likewise, I also got the shock fluid numbers as well off of there. I did take a little artistic license with the fluid. I went with a similar ratio to what people were running, but I went a little heavier in the fluid, not by a lot. Some people were actually running more than 20 up front. Most people were running about 10 to 15 in the front and 7 to 10 in the rear. And so that's why I went with 20 and 12.5. So these are going to be just my base numbers to start. And since there is no build sheet for this vehicle included in the instructions, I'm just taking down things on paper, my shocks, if I'm going to use any limiters, because that's the way I'm going to be able to adjust ride height. Aside from preload, max ride height front and rear is going to be determined by adding or removing limiters into the shock body or below them to limit how far down it can compress. For example, I could put a couple millimeters of plastic spacers in here to keep this from actually hitting the chassis at bottom on flat. Now, that isn't necessarily always going to come into play, but it's just giving you examples of what those would be for. And then any changes that I've made, I'm going to have my final stroke numbers. That's the maximum length of the shock, and then minimum. And that's easily done with a pair of calipers before you attach them to the car. It's also a good way to make sure that they are equal in length. And I've got my diff fluids here as well. I'm probably going to work up something in either Microsoft Word or Excel that'll have other variable items like my turnbuckle locations, my shock pivot point locations, things of that nature. choice of tires, because ultimately these tires are not going to last, and I'm going to be going with a everyone says these are soft tires. I don't think these are soft at all. They may wear like a soft tire, but they do not feel like a good sticky off-road tire that you would get from like Proline or J Concepts. They almost feel plasticky in my opinion, but hey, that's my opinion. I will eventually be getting 1/10 scale wheels and tires. First, I need to figure out what the offsets are going to be to find the right wheels to purchase. So there's a lot of factors in this. Now, one of the things I'm also planning to do, I've mentioned this before, I really don't have any interest in speed runs. I'm really not a fan. I don't think it's very safe. I mean, if you've got a place where you guarantee there's no one around, you know, no one's going to come by jogging with their dog or something like that when you're ripping through a parking lot at 100 miles an hour with your little death machine, you could really hurt somebody with a vehicle this heavy going 100 miles an hour. And you may have an AMA membership, or whatever country you're in, you may have a licensing body membership that provides you with insurance. That insurance is not going to give you any coverage. They are going to disavow you the moment they realize that you caused property damage or personal injury damage, you know, doing crazy speed runs in a parking lot. That insurance is for covering you from injuries and damage at a licensed racetrack, a sanctioned facility, not just someone's backyard or some parking lot somewhere. So, you know, if you guys want to do speed runs, knock yourselves out. I got a mortgage and I don't feel like spending the last of my life in court getting sued. So, you know, if you can make it safe, I am fine with that. I don't have a problem with anybody doing speed runs on YouTube. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to, you know, rain on anyone's parade or say that anyone's bad. Okay? I just don't want to engage in that for the reasons I've just stated. What I'm far more interested in, and I have been since I saw that this kit was going to be released, and that's the main reason that I pre-ordered it immediately, was that I wanted to see if I could make this into a race car. Most people who want to get into racing can't afford it. It's extremely expensive. You're talking about, you know, a good $1,000 almost to prep and build a decent all-wheel drive car. The kits are in the $550 to $650 range for this class all-wheel drive buggy 10th scale. And that doesn't include motor, speed control, servo, wheels and tires, paint, none of that. It's just a bare chassis kit. You've got to buy your fluids, you got to buy all that extra stuff. So, and all the electronics. So I want to see if this can be set up with a decent speed controller, motor, servo, and pretty much the car as is, with whatever small modifications I can make in the way of tuning, springs, proper fluids, and see if I can take it to the track and even remotely be competitive. It's definitely going to be heavier. You know, that would be a way for somebody to get into racing without a huge expense. So on to the build. My initial first run, because I want to get this out and drive it, is going to be diffs, shocks. Now, I definitely recommend this car if you are even remotely considering any of the other WLToy cars, any of the 112s. Because number one, it's actually a 1/10 scale car, which means it's the right size to be in any potential race class. Okay, number two, unlike the differentials in the, what was it, the 129, if you watch my videos, you'll see that those diffs do not have a paper gasket. between the diff housing and the main drive gear. They do not have O-rings at the out drives. So even if you take out the stock, whatever grease is in there, and put in good fluid, it will leak out sooner or later. These actually are sealed. They are proper differentials. The gears may not be the best, you know, but it is not going to leak, or it shouldn't. That's a big improvement, and this car is only slightly more expensive than the 112 versions. Also, unlike the 112 size cars, these shock bodies have 2 seals inside the shock body for the shock shaft instead of just one. And there's also a spacer between them. I've talked about stacks before. That makes a huge difference in how good the shock is going to function, stiction, and how reliable it's going to be as far as not having fluid leaking, etc. So these are, at least on the surface, on paper, half decent shocks. They're, you know, properly adjustable. It shouldn't be a big deal to get a good functioning shock absorber using good springs and proper fluids, and then being able to tune the car by adjusting the viscosity of the fluid and changing the stiffness of the springs. It also has the attachment points for sway bars, and I've ordered a couple off-the-shelf sway bar kits, and the shock arms have the ball studs built into them. So it's just a matter of bolting a sway bar on here, and that's going to be essential to getting a good handling race car. So I'm going to try to keep a budget on all of these items, and for those that are interested, I will make that information available to you, who I buy from, how much it costs, etc. Another thing that I'm going to be doing, I talked about this earlier, that one of the things that I was hoping for this kit was that a standard shorty pack will fit into this chassis. These are basically to limit the flexibility of the car, and you can tune that flexibility by removing one or more screws, is the idea. I think they pretty much just throw these in here to make it look like a normal 1/10 scale car. In any event, these items could potentially, if the holes are in the correct space, since this is a clone of existing kits basically, it might be possible to find these parts off the shelf. Probably not, but possible. At the very least, I could get these cut out of fiberglass, or make them myself out of aluminum, whatever. All things that might be done down the road. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to pause, and I'm going to start the disassembly. I'll try to show you parts of that, at least in sped up, you know, so that you don't have to just watch me twist screws for an hour. And any interesting things I come along as I'm disassembling, I'll discuss. Okay, just took the wheels, tires off. Just wanted to show you something. Our little bumper panel here screws on with 2 Phillips head screws, and these look to be M3s. They're not self-tapping. They're a normal screw, metal to metal. One of them was finger loose, the other one was barely snugged down also, and these should really have a little bit of Loctite on them. So right off the bat, if you get this car, don't go out and run it right away. At least go over the car to look for stuff that might be loose, even if you're doing no other mods. And you really should, before you even run this the first time, be opening your diffs. I recommend taking off the 2 ball studs at either end of the steering linkages. I'll just demonstrate that real quick. You just go through that hole in the top of the ball cup and unscrew the ball stud. You need to lift the arm a little bit so that the ball cup is perpendicular, so you can get to the hex head at the top of the ball stud, and then it just comes right off like that. So I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Okay, and so now with those disconnected, we don't have to worry about taking our steering linkage off. On the bottom here, we're going to take out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 screws, and that should allow us to remove the entire front clip. The drive shaft will just pull, the dog bone will just pull out and come with us. Now, unlike the others, a lot of these screws seem to be conventional hardware, although it's Phillips head. I'm going to replace the lion's share of these with either steel, titanium, or aluminum hardware that has hex heads. And that will make a big difference right there in the ease of maintenance. Because I'm not a big Phillips head fan. They strip. And we're going to have to see some of these. We may actually have to heat up with a little torch to soften Loctite if they have gone overboard, as they did with the 12s and the 144s. I'm not sure if those even pass through there. I'm going to start by taking these 4 screws right here. Those may just be pass-throughs. In other words, there may just be a hole in the pan large enough for that head to pass through. It may not actually be holding it in place. We'll see in a moment. The hardware definitely looks to be better. These screw heads seem to be hardened, and hopefully that goes throughout and stripping won't be such a problem as it was with the 112s. It seems like everything that I complained about or mentioned in my videos that I thought was a shortcoming for the 129 12 scale, they seem to have addressed in this kit. Okay, now what is still holding this on? Could be one last screw here. Oh, it's attached to the tongue down here, so I need to pull this screw and this screw. And there's our front assembly. It would have been easier to remove these 2 screws right here than the 3 screws that hold this tongue on for future reference. I'm going to go ahead and take those off now and replace the tongue. You know, there's a lot that really needs to be done to this before you drive it. There's no lubrication in this CV joint here at all. You know, those are all things that, and likewise the ball cup here has no lubricant in it. All of those should be hit with a little bit of grease, not oil. You want a grease that's going to stick around. In fact, that almost should be taken apart so you can lubricate its inner parts properly. Just dabbing grease on the outside of that is not going to get grease down inside that cup. And that's going to be the same thing with these axles. I don't know why they don't do that. It's not that hard to do when you're already assembling these things by hand. But you know, this is a good exercise though for anybody who is buying this car, unless you're just going to drive it until it drops and then cast it aside. It's a good idea to disassemble the car and learn all of its components. So now I need to rummage hardware. And it's actually a good thing that I've been doing so many builds and replacing things with titanium, because now I have all this leftover steel hardware. These are like 6mm ones, and I seem to have 8s and up. No, I have more of these. There we go. That thing is pretty heavy. Now, as I mentioned, I am not going to go through every little bit of hardware here trying to swap stuff out, because I'm not doing a motor swap at this time or anything like that. All I'm really trying to do here is get these diffs squared away so they're not a problem. Okay, on to our front end. What's the easiest way to get this diff apart? Let's see. Well, we're going to have to take out those 2 screws. But let's see, one at a time. And I should just take the shocks off at this point anyway, because I'm going to be rebuilding those. But I'm kind of trying to see how easy it is to get this diff case open. Oh wow, it comes right off. 2 screws. That's nice. I thought I was going to have to take this off. So actually, you don't even need to remove this assembly to remove the diff. We should be able to extract this without too much trouble at this point. Springs are in the way, so we got to move the shocks, but it's easy enough to lube this. And as you can see, there is absolutely nothing there. This is dry as a bone. So you could take the shocks, the top of the shocks off, and then just push the diff forward with the 2 drive shafts and pull it off the dog bones, and you're out. So this is actually very nice. And there's also going to be 2 screws from down below that need to come off. That was those 2 long screws I was muttering about. That's these guys here. And those come through these holes right here. They actually do have pass-throughs, so they're not screwed through the pan. The round head bolt just sits inside that hole there. Just putting those nuts back on there so I don't misplace them. I'm not sure this car merits titanium yet, so I'm just going to replace any of the hardware I can with steel, and that way at least I've got hex heads, and then down the road, if this becomes even remotely raceable, I'll think about it then. Okay, I don't know how well greased these ball bearings are. I've got some bearing oil here, and I'm just going to put a little bead around the edge and let that seep in while I'm working. Now, these screws you need to be very careful with when you're putting them back in. Taking them out, you need to be very careful not to strip them. Make sure you've got the right size Phillips head screwdrivers so that you can work on these without damaging them. Number two, when you're putting them back in, you need to be careful not to either strip the plastic housing or snap the head off one of these screws by tightening them too tight. Also, I'm sure this will be a factor as it was with the other kit. Yeah, see, it's just some waxy grease. The gears are basically dry. I hope you guys are taking yours apart. These diff cases are very soft. You can see that I can squeeze it and deform it. Okay, so when you're screwing this together, if you tighten this gear too tight, you can actually collapse this case slightly, and even a little bit is going to, number one, potentially cause leakage at the, and not a good seal, but it's also going to make the gears bind against each other, and that is not a good thing. Your diff won't turn properly. You'll destroy the gears, you'll wreck the case. It's all bad. So we're going to pull our pin. We've got a little shim here. And there is the first of our O-rings. And that is really nice that they have put those in for us. They're fairly stiff rubber, but I'm not going to go looking around for silicone replacements right this minute. Someone's at my front door. Okay, I've disassembled the diff. There wasn't much to clean, but I did basically clean off all the old, if you can call it grease. It's more like a wax. This is O-ring grease, and since we have a pair of O-rings here, I'm going to use a little bit of this just on the O-rings themselves. One of the reasons is that this type of grease is formulated to condition O-rings to help keep them moist, keep them from degrading prematurely. So that is why I'm going to use a bit of this. Got one hell of a storm blowing in. It's supposed to be a little cloudy and sunny most of the day. Now, before I drop one of these two gears in here, I'm going to go ahead and put a drop of diff fluid down into here so that it gets in between the shim and the gear. Diff fluid is really thick and it's hard to sometimes get all the air gaps filled. So I'm going to put a little bit of diff fluid in here to start. It's good to get some lube into these gears ahead of time. I want to make sure that everything runs smooth and isn't wearing. There we go. One nicely rebuilt diff. I'm kind of pressuring it in there, let it expand out. I'll wipe off the excess, so hopefully I'm getting this deep down in there and everything will be nice and lubricated. Just trying not to be completely wasteful. We'll close this up for now until I get to the other side. go. I'll lube up these gears from the bottom. So now all I need to do, slide that back in and then get myself some hardware. Doesn't matter going a little overboard on this because it's all just going to fly against the walls, anything that's left over. Now, before I put this back in, I want to take a look under here. Let's see if we've just got a gear or maybe there's a slipper clutch. I can also inspect the motor mount and see if it is slotted. If it's slotted, that means we can move the motor left and right, which means we can change our pinion gear. That would be a really nice thing if they added that feature in for us, because that was one of the problems with making the other car go fast, was that you were stuck with the stock gearing. You couldn't move the motor, so you couldn't change the gear. Yep. One big solid metal gear. Oh my God, what a monster. That thing weighs a ton. Jeez. You know, there's almost enough space there to put a center diff if I could find one the right size. That thing's obscene. It's got to weigh a quarter pound. Okay, 88.33 grams, 3 ounces and change. Yeah, that thing's obnoxious. Okay, I want to take some measurements on this. I can't say for sure, but it does look like we can slide the motor back and forth, which means we could change our gearing. Now that's another heavy item that could easily be replaced with some fiberglass or carbon fiber piece. Okay, since all I'm doing is putting this little plastic case together, I am going to use some aluminum screws for that. And the nice thing is all these holes are pre-tapped for me because I'm not building a scratch kit here, so this makes it a lot easier. And this isn't as much about saving weight as it is having enough screws of the right size. That gear is just outrageous. I mean, swapping that out for a slipper clutch or a diff would just knock a ton of weight off of this car right there. And that thing is unbelievably huge. I hope you enjoyed this video.
Please click like and please subscribe to my channel.